Hello, everyone, and welcome to AP US History for Winners with your teacher, Mr. Johnson. Last time, we talked about European exploration in the Americas, the Columbian Exchange, Spanish exploration, and conquest. And today, we are talking about labor, slavery, and caste in the Spanish colonial system, along with cultural interactions between Europeans, natives, and Africans. So, if you are ready, let's begin. The first concept to talk about is the encomienda system. And this system is very important, so I would star this one and make sure we commit it to memory. The encomienda system is a labor system used by the Spanish. And basically, what it does is it is grants from the Spanish crown to the Spanish colonists in the Americas. So the Spanish crown is allowing the Spanish colonists to do this. And it gives them the right to organize Native American labor and demand tribute from natives in the colonists' area, as long as the colonists promise to Christianize and quote unquote protect the natives. So essentially, what this is giving is the Spanish crown is giving Spanish colonists the right to make Native Americans complete labor for them, make Native Americans give Spanish colonists tribute in the form of money or resources, as long as these colonists are Christianizing them and protecting them. And this is what the Spanish crown wants. This is the justification for the poor treatment of the Native Americans from the Spanish, right? So this is the way the Spanish are justifying how they're treating them, because they are protecting them, quote unquote, or they are Christianizing them. They're teaching them about Christianity. So this is what the encomienda system is. It is mainly used for farming, sugar, wheat, or rice, or mining in gold and silver. And mining in gold and silver was a much more dangerous job, but all these jobs are very dangerous. And a lot of Native Americans died while they were working. They were pushed too far while they were working. Eventually, this system does fall out of favor with the Spanish, and it's going to get replaced by African slave labor. So let's talk about that. The beginnings of African slavery are going to happen when European traders are going to partner with some West African groups to get slaves. Eventually, it's going to expand into taking slaves. And the Spanish are going to use these slaves on their plantations and mines, like we just talked about, especially sugar, gold, and silver. These are kind of the main goods that the Spanish are going to use to fund their empire, and this is what they're going to use the slaves to do, right? So this is how the slave trade really gets its beginnings. Another thing to know about the Spanish colonial system is something called the Spanish caste system. This is a system that the Spanish developed to define the status of Europeans, Africans, and natives, and you can see it pictured here on the bottom right in this triangle, right? So at the top are the peninsulares. So these are the Spanish people who are born in Spain. They have the most rights. They are thought of as in the highest regard. Then there are the Creoles. These are people who are born in the colonies, but they both of their parents are Spanish. Then there are the mestizos. That these are their parents. They're born in the colonies, but their parents are Spanish and Native Americans. And then it is Native American Indians. And then at the very bottom are the enslaved Africans that people brought over from Africa or people brought over from the Caribbean in the slave trade. Okay. The Spanish decisions to move mostly men to the colonies resulted in this mixed race caste system with a lot of intermarriage, right? Because the Spanish are bringing mostly men, they're then going to get into relations with Native Americans, and that is going to create people of mixed identities, okay? And that's why they developed this caste system to define the status of Europeans, Africans, and natives. Now let's talk a little bit about European and Native American worldviews and how they are differ or in some different areas. Okay, so for example, in religion, uh, most Europeans, especially during this time, would be Christian or Catholic, kind of falling under the same umbrella, whereas Native Americans are practicing animism, polytheism. They'll often have these ideas of shamans, right? So their religions do not often believe in one God, and they're a lot more focused on the power of nature, whereas Europeans have one God in Christianity or Catholicism. Okay. As far as gender roles and families go, European societies are often male dominated. They're patriarchal societies. Whereas Native American societies, they differ. Some societies were patriarchal, but they also had matrilineal societies where the family line was passed down through women. In terms of land use, Europeans had strong concept of private ownership, that individual people could own land, and that land then belonged to a country or a region. Whereas Native Americans often believed that individuals did not own land on an individual basis. They did believe in the concept of like a group owning this section of land, or this is the group's area, but they did not have these strong ideas of individual property rights that Europeans did have. And then last, talking about power, Europeans often were family or individual focused in terms of their power structures, and it was often male dominated, right? Most of the time, we're thinking about men at the top of governments in European governments at the time. Whereas Native American power associations were often group focused, and we talked about in previous classes about how there were democracies and things like that within Native American groups, and they have a lot more sharing of power in some societies of Native American groups. Now, we're going to speak a little bit about European or Native American misunderstandings and adaptations. All right, so both groups misunderstood one another, which caused issues in various ways. Right? They did not have the same ideas of how land was going to be used. They did not have the same gender roles. They did not have the same family setup. So they are not coming to the table with the same background, and that's going to cause misunderstandings. I mean, one example of this is that Columbus, right, originally thinks he is discovering the Indies, right? He thinks he's discovering the West Indies, and he thinks that the natives are Indians, right? Which we find out they're not, right? That's why he called them Indians. Another example of this is Montezuma thought that Hernan Cortez, was a god, right? So Montezuma is the leader of the Aztec Empire, and when he meets Cortez, he sees Cortez, like you can see in this picture on the right? He sees Cortez coming on a horse. He had never seen horses before. He sees them sailing in from on these great big giant ships, bringing these wild beasts with them, with armor, with all these weapons they had never seen. And so he views Cortez as a god, or there's some impression of that in the beginning, right? And so these misunderstandings of each other and the fact that they had never seen some of the things that Europeans or Native Americans are bringing with them are going to create issues. Now, eventually, Europeans and Native Americans are going to adopt parts of each other's society. They're going to assimilate a little bit, right? So Europeans are going to adopt some of the fishing techniques. They're going to adopt maize, the idea of three sisters, the colonists that are living in the Americas. They're going to adopt these ideas. And Native Americans are going to adopt guns and horses and religion and language that a lot of the Europeans are bringing over. And this is going to dramatically change both Europeans and Native American way of life. Next, let's talk a little bit about native resistance. So, as Europeans began to dominate, natives started to resist. And Native Americans wanted to preserve their political sovereignty. And so, what that means is they wanted to maintain their own rights as groups of people. They did not want to just bow down to the European nations. Native Americans wanted to have economic prosperity. They wanted to make money for themselves. They wanted to be successful. They wanted to maintain their own religious beliefs, their own gender rules, right? All these things that made up the different groups, cultures, and societies. They did not just want to completely adapt to European way of life. So some examples of this. The Aztecs often resist Cortez through bribes and eventually trying to directly fight Cortez. The Incas, they fight back against Pizarro. In some other ways, the Native American men in sometimes in like systems like the encomienda system would refuse to farm. They saw that as women's work. They did not think that they should need to do that, so they refused to work. And there's a famous rebellion by the Guayal Indians in 1597 against the Spanish. So I point out these examples to you so that you can see that Native Americans are resisting European way of life in some ways, but the resistance is not always successful. And we talked about that in previous lessons, often because of the impact that disease has on Native American populations. The last topic to talk about today is the European debate over the treatment of non Europeans. So, Europeans themselves are debating how they should be treating Africans and Native Americans. They are not all in agreement on what should be done. We've done some of this for our summer work. Juan de Sepulveda, I'm probably getting this name wrong. He wanted a more tough treatment of Native Americans. And then Bartolome de las Casas. This is a very important name to know, Bartolome de las Casas. So I would star this one. He argues for the better treatment of Native Americans, and we read primary sources from him. So we see that there are disagreements between Europeans over how they should be treating Native Americans and Africans. And Europeans often justified their treatment of natives and Africans through religion, through culture, and through race, right? So in religion, Europeans are going to use parts of the Old Testament to kind of justify their treatment. In culture, we often see this stereotype of natives or Africans thought of as quote unquote savages, right? That they are less civilized as a race. And so that is why it was justified for Europeans to treat them in such a poor manner. That was some of their arguments at the time. Okay, so that is it for our notes on labor, slavery, and caste in the Spanish colonial system, along with cultural interactions between Europeans, Native Americans, and Africans. So let's get to these big idea questions. Number one, describe the encomienda system. Number two, describe the differences between Europeans and Native Americans. Be able to name a few of those differences. And number three, describe the justification that Europeans use for slavery. Thank you so much for watching. This lesson actually concludes Unit 1, and we will start Unit 2 next time. Thank you.